Hello there, dear listeners. My name is Eleanor, but everyone's always called me Ellie. Welcome to my story. A story that changed not just my life, but revealed truths that my own family tried to hide from me for decades. Please make yourselves comfortable, because what I'm about to tell you is about betrayal, abandonment, but also about justice that came from where I least expected it. It all started on a Tuesday in October. I had just turned 74, and my health hadn't been the best. For months, I'd been having chest pains, shortness of breath, and my daughter Sarah finally convinced me to go to the hospital for some tests. "Mom, you need to take care of yourself," she'd say, with that tone of voice she used when she wanted to sound concerned. Today I know it was all an act. I was admitted to St. Mary's Hospital for a series of cardiac tests. Nothing too serious, according to the doctors. Just routine procedures for a woman my age. Sarah accompanied me to the reception desk, filled out some paperwork, and said she'd come back the next day to pick me up. "Rest up, Mom. Tomorrow you'll be home," were her last words before leaving me in that cold, impersonal room. But tomorrow came, and Sarah didn't show up. Not the next day either, or the day after that. The first 2 days, I thought maybe she'd gotten confused about the dates. After all, at 74, sometimes I got confused about appointments myself. But when the third day arrived and none of my 3 children had shown up, I started getting worried. I called home several times, but no one answered. I tried Sarah's cell phone, Michael's, David's, nothing. The morning shift nurse, a young woman named Lisa, started noticing my anxiety. "Mrs. Eleanor, your family didn't come visit you today either?" she asked on the 4th day while checking my blood pressure. I shook my head, trying to hold back tears. "I don't understand what's happening," I whispered. "They said they'd come back." Lisa looked at me with compassion. She was a sweet girl, with blonde hair tied back in a ponytail and gentle blue eyes. "How about I try calling them?" she offered. I gave her all the numbers I knew by heart, watching as she dialed each one, waiting, leaving messages. But hours passed, and no one called back. By the 5th day, I was beginning to panic. The doctors had cleared me for discharge 3 days earlier, but hospital policy required a family member or designated contact to come pick me up. I wasn't allowed to just walk out on my own. I felt trapped, abandoned. Like I was invisible to the people who were supposed to love me most. That's when Lisa suggested something that would change everything. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed, "do you have any other family members we could contact? Maybe a lawyer or a close friend?" I thought about it for a moment. There was Mr. Patterson, the family lawyer who'd handled my late husband's estate. Frank Patterson had been a friend of my husband George for over 30 years. I hadn't spoken to him in a couple of years, but he might help. Lisa called Mr. Patterson's office, and to my surprise, he answered immediately. When she explained the situation, I could hear his voice getting louder through the phone. "What do you mean she's been there for 5 days alone?" he asked. "I'll be right there." Frank Patterson arrived at the hospital within an hour, looking exactly as I remembered him, tall, silver-haired, with kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He was wearing his usual navy suit and carried a leather briefcase that had seen better days. When he saw me, his face showed a mixture of anger and concern that I hadn't seen in anyone's eyes for days. "Ellie, what in God's name is going on?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "Why hasn't anyone come to get you?" I explained everything, how Sarah had dropped me off, how none of my children had returned my calls, how I'd been stuck there for 5 days with no explanation. Frank's expression grew darker with each detail. "This is completely unacceptable," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "Let me make some calls." He stepped outside the room, and I could hear him through the thin walls, his voice stern and authoritative. When he came back, his face was grim. "Ellie, I need to tell you something," he said, sitting down heavily. "I called your house, and Sarah answered. She told me," he paused, as if struggling with how to phrase it. "She told me they thought you had died." My heart stopped. "What?" She said they received a call from the hospital 3 days ago saying you had passed away. They've been making funeral arrangements. Frank's voice was barely above a whisper. "But Ellie, I checked with the hospital administration. No such call was ever made. Someone is lying." The room started spinning. My own children thought I was dead and hadn't even bothered to come to the hospital to claim my body. It was impossible to comprehend. But why would they think that? I asked, my voice breaking. Frank took my hand gently. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. In the meantime, let me get you out of here. You'll stay with me and Martha until we figure this out." As Frank helped me gather my few belongings, my mind was racing. Why would my children think I was dead? And more importantly, why hadn't they come to identify my body or make arrangements with the hospital? Something was very wrong. Frank drove me to his house in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Martha, his wife, welcomed me with open arms and a cup of hot tea. She was a small, round woman with grey curls and the warmest smile I'd ever seen. "Oh, Ellie dear," she said, "you must be exhausted. Let's get you settled in the guest room." That night, lying in the Pattersons' guest bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my children, about the life I'd built with George, about the house we'd shared for 47 years. George had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving me alone in that big house with its memories and its silence. My children had been attentive at first, but as time went on, their visits became less frequent, their calls shorter. The next morning, Frank came to the breakfast table with a serious expression. "Ellie, I've been thinking about this all night, and I need to ask you something. When was the last time you reviewed your will?" I thought about it. "Not since George died, I suppose. Why?" "Because I think I know what's happening here." Frank sat down across from me, his coffee cup trembling slightly in his hands. "Ellie, do you remember the terms of your will?" I nodded slowly. "I left everything to my 3 children, to be divided equally. The house, the savings, the land." I trailed off as a horrible realization began to dawn on me. "The land," Frank repeated. "Ellie, do you realize how much that land is worth now?" My husband George had inherited a large piece of property from his father, nearly 200 acres of prime real estate on the outskirts of town. When we got married, he'd insisted on putting it in my name for tax purposes. Over the years, as the town grew and developed, that land had become incredibly valuable. George used to joke that we were sitting on a gold mine. "The developers have been circling that property for years," Frank continued. "I've had at least a dozen calls from different companies wanting to buy it. We're talking about millions of dollars, Ellie." My blood ran cold. "You think my children?" "I think they're trying to have you declared dead so they can inherit your estate," Frank said bluntly. "If you're legally dead, they can claim the property and sell it." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. My own children, the babies I'd nursed, the toddlers I'd comforted, the teenagers I'd supported through every crisis, were willing to let me die alone in a hospital room for money. "What can we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Frank leaned forward, his eyes intense. "We fight back. But first, we need to understand exactly what they've done." I'm going to make some calls to the probate court, see if they filed any paperwork. And I think we need to go to your house." That afternoon, Frank and I drove to my house, the house where I'd lived for nearly 50 years, where I'd raised my children, where I'd planned to live out my remaining days. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw cars I didn't recognize parked outside. Through the front window, I could see people moving around inside. "Stay in the car," Frank said grimly. "Let me handle this." I watched as Frank walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Sarah answered, and even from the car, I could see the shock on her face. She called out to someone inside, and soon Michael and David appeared at the door. My 3 children stood there, staring at Frank as if they'd seen a ghost. Frank spoke to them for several minutes, his voice carrying across the yard. I couldn't make out the words, but I could see the expressions on my children's faces changing from shock to anger to fear. Finally, Frank turned and walked back to the car. "Well?" I asked as he got in. "They claim they received a call from someone at the hospital saying you had died," Frank said. "They say they were planning the funeral for this weekend." He paused, his jaw clenched. "But Ellie, there are real estate agents in your house. They're preparing to sell the property." My heart broke all over again. "How long do you think they've been planning this?" "I don't know, but we're going to find out. I've already called the police to report attempted fraud. And tomorrow, we're going to the courthouse to make sure your will is properly protected." The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings, police interviews, and painful revelations. The investigation revealed that no one from the hospital had ever called my children to report my death. Instead, they had simply stopped visiting, stopped calling, and when enough time had passed, they'd told people I had died. They'd even placed an obituary in the local newspaper. But the most shocking discovery came when Frank reviewed the paperwork they'd filed with the probate court. They hadn't just claimed I was dead, they'd been planning this for months. Michael, my oldest son, had been working with a real estate development company to sell the land. They'd already drawn up contracts, pending the transfer of ownership. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, Frank told me as we sat in his office, surrounded by legal documents. They've been planning to get rid of you for a long time. The betrayal was complete. My children hadn't just abandoned me, they'd actively plotted to steal my property by letting me die alone and forgotten in a hospital bed. But Frank had one more surprise for me. "Ellie, there's something else you need to know about your will," he said, pulling out a thick folder. "Something your children don't know." He opened the folder and showed me a document I'd forgotten about, a codicil to the will that George had insisted on adding years before his death. "Remember when George was worried about the kids' spending habits?" Frank asked. "He made you add this clause." I read the document, and for the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. The codicil stated that if any of my children attempted to have me declared dead prematurely, or if they engaged in any fraudulent activity regarding my estate, they would be completely disinherited. "They don't know about this," Frank said with a slight smile. "George insisted we keep it confidential. He said he hoped it would never be necessary, but he wanted to protect you from exactly this situation." The legal battle that followed was swift and decisive. The evidence of fraud was overwhelming. The fake death story, the premature probate filing, the real estate contracts. My children had been so confident in their plan that they hadn't even tried to hide their tracks. When the case went to court, I sat in the front row, watching as my own children were forced to face the consequences of their betrayal. Sarah, my only daughter, couldn't even look at me. Michael and David sat with their heads down, their expensive lawyers whispering frantically in their ears. The judge was not sympathetic. This court has rarely seen such a callous and calculated attempt to defraud a parent, he said, his voice echoing through the courtroom. The defendant's actions represent not just legal fraud, but a moral bankruptcy that is deeply disturbing. The ruling was everything Frank had hoped for. Not only were my children found guilty of attempted fraud, but the codicil to my will was enforced. They were completely disinherited, and the court ordered them to pay restitution for the emotional distress they'd caused. But the story doesn't end there. Remember, my children had been living on my land for years. Sarah lived in the small house we'd built for her when she got divorced. Michael had constructed a workshop for his contracting business on the eastern section of the property. David had been using the back 40 acres for his horse breeding operation. They'd all been living and working on my land, assuming they would inherit it. Now, suddenly, they were trespassers. The day after the court ruling, Frank and I drove back to my property. This time, I got out of the car and walked up to my own front door. Sarah was sitting on the porch, her face red from crying. "Mom," she said, standing up shakily. "I can explain." "No," I said firmly. "You can't. You left me to die alone in that hospital. You told people I was dead. You tried to steal my property. There's no explanation that can make that right." "But Mom, we thought." "You thought you could get away with it," I interrupted. "You thought I was old and weak, and that no one would care about one forgotten old woman. But you were wrong. Over the next few weeks, I had to make the hardest decision of my life. My children had 30 days to remove themselves and their belongings from my property. Sarah begged, Michael threatened, David tried to negotiate. But I stood firm. The land that they'd been so eager to inherit was no longer theirs. In fact, it would never be theirs. I decided to leave it to the Patterson family, who had shown me more love and kindness in 1 week than my own children had in years. I also made another decision that some might consider harsh. I sold a small portion of the land to a development company, not the one my children had been working with, but their competitor. The sale gave me enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my days, and it sent a clear message: I was very much alive, and I was in control of my own destiny. The new development was called Sunrise Manor, a retirement community for active seniors. I used part of the money to buy myself a beautiful townhouse there, where I could live independently, but have help available if I needed it. The irony wasn't lost on me. My children had tried to get rid of me, but instead, they'd given me a new lease on life. 6 months later, I was settled in my new home, surrounded by new friends and activities. I joined the community garden club, started taking watercolor painting classes, and even learned to play bridge. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Frank Patterson visited me regularly, often bringing Martha along for lunch. They'd become the family I'd always wanted, people who cared about me for who I was, not for what I owned. One day, as we sat on my small patio overlooking the community garden, Frank brought up a subject I'd been dreading. "Ellie, Sarah called my office again yesterday. She's asking if you'd be willing to see her." I'd been expecting this. Over the months, all 3 of my children had tried to contact me through Frank, through mutual friends, even through the church. They'd sent letters, flowers, cards. But I wasn't ready to forgive, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "The same thing I've told them all. That you're not ready to talk, and that they need to respect your wishes." I nodded, watching a group of children play in the nearby park. "Frank, do you think I'm being too hard on them?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Ellie, they left you alone in a hospital bed, thinking you were going to die, and they didn't even come to say goodbye. They chose money over their mother. That's not the kind of mistake you make accidentally. He was right, of course. But sometimes in the quiet moments, I wondered if I'd ever be able to forgive them. Not for their sake, but for mine. A year later, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Lisa, the nurse who had helped me at the hospital. She tracked me down through Frank's office and asked if she could come see me, Mrs. Eleanor, she said, sitting in my living room with a cup of tea, I wanted to thank you. Thank me for what? For being brave enough to fight back. After what happened to you, the hospital changed its policies. Now we have better procedures for patients who seem to be abandoned. And I wanted to tell you something else. She reached into her purse and pulled out a newspaper clipping. My grandmother was in a similar situation last year. Her son was trying to have her declared incompetent so he could sell her house. When I told her your story, it gave her the courage to fight back. She won, and she's doing great now. I stared at the clipping, which showed a photo of an elderly woman cutting a ribbon at a new senior centre. She used the money from selling part of her property to build this, Lisa continued. She calls it Eleanor's Place, after you. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was upset, but because I was overwhelmed with a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time, purpose. My story had helped someone else. The terrible thing that had happened to me had prevented it from happening to another family. The next morning, I called Frank. I want to start a foundation, I told him, to help elderly people who are being taken advantage of by their families. Ellie, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, I think that's a wonderful idea. Within 6 months, the Eleanor Foundation was established. We provided legal assistance to elderly people facing family fraud, supported hospitals in developing better patient advocacy programs, and created educational materials about elder abuse. It wasn't just about money, it was about dignity, respect, and the right to be treated with love in your final years. The foundation grew quickly, partly because, unfortunately, my situation wasn't unique. We helped dozens of families in the first year alone. Each case was different, but the underlying betrayal was always the same: adult children who saw their aging parents as obstacles to overcome rather than people to cherish. 2 years after that terrible week in the hospital, I was invited to speak at a conference on elder abuse. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of lawyers, social workers, and family advocates, I felt a strength I'd never known I possessed. My name is Eleanor, I began, and I want to tell you about the 6 days that changed my life. Not because they were the worst days of my life, but because they led to the best days of my life. I told them about the hospital, about the abandonment, about the betrayal. But I also told them about Frank and Martha, about Lisa the nurse, about the foundation, about all the people we'd helped. I told them that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you can also be the thing that sets you free. After my speech, a young woman approached me. She was probably in her 30s, with worried eyes and a nervous smile, Mrs. Eleanor, my name is Jennifer. I think my mother is in a situation similar to what you experienced. Could you help me figure out what to do? That conversation led to our 15th successful case. Jennifer's mother had been isolated by her brother, who was controlling her finances and had already moved her to a nursing home against her will. With the foundation's help, we were able to restore her independence and her dignity. But the most surprising development came 3 years after the hospital incident. I was working in my garden when Frank called with unexpected news. Ellie, I just got a call from Michael. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from any of my children in over a year. What did he want? He's been following the foundation's work. He wants to make a donation. I almost dropped the phone. A donation. A significant one. He says he's been in therapy, working through what happened. He doesn't expect forgiveness, but he wants to support the work you're doing. I sat down heavily on my garden bench. What do you think I should do? I think, Frank said carefully, that you should do whatever feels right to you. No pressure, no expectations. Just what feels right. I thought about it for days. Michael's donation could help us expand our services, reach more people, prevent more tragedies. But accepting it felt like a betrayal of everything I'd fought for. Finally, I made my decision. I would accept the donation, but it would be anonymous. The foundation would benefit, but I wouldn't have to face the complicated emotions of reconciling with my son. Frank handled the transaction, and true to my wishes, Michael's name never appeared on any of our materials. But knowing that he'd chosen to support our work, even in a small way, gave me a sense of closure I hadn't expected. On the 4th anniversary of my hospital stay, I was asked to give another speech, this time at a national conference on elder rights. As I prepared my remarks, I reflected on how much my life had changed. For years ago, I'd been a lonely widow, forgotten by her children and left to die alone in a hospital bed. Today, I was surrounded by friends, engaged in meaningful work, and living each day with purpose and joy. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had actually saved me. My name is Eleanor. I began that day, and I want to tell you about the power of survival. Not just the survival of the body, but the survival of the spirit. I talked about the difference between being forgotten and being invisible, about the importance of advocates like Lisa the nurse, about the legal protections that Frank had helped me understand. But mostly, I talked about the unexpected gifts that can come from the worst experiences of our lives. I won't lie to you, I said to the audience. There are still days when I feel angry about what my children did. There are still moments when I grieve for the family I thought I had. But I've learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're really made of. After the conference, I flew back home to my little townhouse at Sunrise Manor. Martha Patterson was waiting for me with a home-cooked meal and a stack of mail from the foundation. Among the letters was one that made my heart race. It was from Sarah. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines written in my daughter's familiar handwriting. Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to know that I've seen what you're doing with the foundation, and I'm proud of you. You're helping people the way you always helped us, even when we didn't deserve it. I love you, and I'm sorry. Sarah. I read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and putting it in my desk drawer. I wasn't ready to respond, and I might never be. But for the first time in years, I felt a tiny crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. That night, I called Frank. I've been thinking about something, I said. What if we expanded the foundation to include family mediation services? Sometimes these situations can be resolved before they get to the legal stage. That's a great idea, Ellie. Are you thinking about your own situation? Maybe, I admitted. Not now, but maybe someday. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing not to let it define the rest of your life. 5 years after those 6 days in the hospital, I celebrated my 80th birthday surrounded by friends from the retirement community, volunteers from the foundation, and Frank and Martha Patterson. It was a small party, but it was filled with love, the kind of love that comes from people who choose to care about you, not people who are obligated to. As I looked around at the faces of people who had become my chosen family, I realized something profound. My biological children had abandoned me, but in doing so, they'd forced me to discover a strength I never knew I had. They'd tried to make me disappear, but instead, they'd helped me find my voice. The Eleanor Foundation had helped over 200 families by then. We'd prevented dozens of cases of elder abuse, helped lonely seniors find community, and educated thousands of people about the warning signs of family fraud. What had started as my personal tragedy had become a force for good in the world. But perhaps the most important thing I'd learned was this: family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, commitment, and care. The people who had shown up for me in my darkest hour, Frank, Martha, Lisa, and all the others, they were my real family. The ones who had abandoned me, they were strangers who happened to share my DNA. Today, as I tell you this story, I'm 82 years old. I live independently. I volunteer at the foundation 3 days a week, and I've recently taken up ballroom dancing. I laugh more than I have in years, I sleep peacefully at night, and I wake up each morning excited about the day ahead. Do I still think about my children? Of course. Do I still feel hurt by their betrayal? Sometimes. But I've learned to carry that pain without letting it carry me. I've learned that the people who try to diminish you often reveal their own weakness, not yours. The land that my children fought so hard to steal. It's now home to a thriving retirement community where hundreds of seniors live with dignity and purpose. The money they thought they'd inherit has been used to help families stay together, to protect the vulnerable, and to ensure that no one else has to endure what I endured. And me, I'm still here. Still fighting. Still growing. Still learning. They tried to forget me, but I remembered myself. They tried to make me disappear, but I found my way back into the light. The lawyer was right. I am still the one who owns the land they thought they would inherit. But more than that, I own my story, my choices, and my future. And that, my dear listeners, is worth more than any piece of property could ever be. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that it's never too late to start over, never too late to find your strength, and never too late to choose the family that truly deserves your love. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up giving us the greatest gift of all, the gift of discovering who we really are when everything else is stripped away. Remember, you are never truly alone as long as you have yourself. And sometimes that's all you need to begin again.